Let's talk about food. This week, with me, Mark Bichachi, on 101. Food is that thing which you put in your mouth that gives you nutrition. Chewing gum is not food, but I mean the things that actually go to your stomach and add value to your body in terms of energy, nutrients, both macro and micro. Now, I'm not going to talk about diets because I am in no way qualified to talk about that, but I know we all eat food and there's something that is critical. Now, let me give you a task that maybe you can answer me now. The question I'm going to ask you is, how long do you think the city of Nairobi can remain intact without needing to bring in food? How long can Nairobi last without its imports from the greater parts of Kenya and outside Kenya without food? Well, the city of Nairobi has, at a maximum, 3 days worth of food stored up for us to use. In other words, in all our markets, all our supermarkets, if they are not able to get that sustained truck, that sustained delivery that delivers food, Nairobi will take 3 days for all of us to start starving. Now, this may seem like a trivial thing because in our imagination, at what point do we even think, imagine, or fathom that Nairobi would run out of food? Now, it's a fair assessment because it has never happened before. But remember this tweet from a certain general who happens to be the president's son of Uganda, talking about how Uganda can take over Kenya. Now, of course, we ranted and raved and said how Kenya has a supreme military, we are more prepared. Arguable, but the main point is that Uganda can actually win against us just by starving us. Yes, you heard me right. If they stop sending us food, where will we fight from? Armies, they say, march on their stomachs. And our stomachs are invariably connected with the Tanzanian market and how they produce what we eat and what we consume in this country on a daily basis. Now, this very thing is not just a war thing, it's also an economic thing. Now, let me give you an interesting fact. The United States is one of the most developed, if not the most developed country in the world. But did you know it is one of the biggest exporters of grain in terms of wheat and maize, they call it corn, to the world? Now, pray tell me, how important is it that the United States produces its own food and is able to be a net exporter of food? The same is true of the French. It is true of many developed countries that rank highly in terms of being able to produce food. Ukraine and Russia are critical because as we speak, the Black Sea deal is dead in the water. Russia has said that they're not going to allow Ukrainian grains to be transported through the Black Sea. That seems like a small thing, but I'll tell you, when Ukraine was allowed by Russia to export its grain, the commodity price went down by 23%. Yes, you had me, a whooping 23%. This was just a few months ago. The price of grain and the fact that we're net importers of grain tells us one thing. Number one, it tells us that Kenya is very sensitive to the price of the dollar. It affects our economy. But second, it also tells you that Kenya is not standing up and being counted in the things that are obvious to its development. Now, it is true that Kenya wants to industrialize, Kenya wants to do all of those nice and mighty things, but Kenya will head nowhere if we cannot feed our people. That's just the truth. If we can't feed our people, we are headed nowhere. There is no country in the world that does not have food security and considers itself developed. This is so critical, very critical. Even the countries in the Middle East, countries like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, sorry, that's the same country, you'll forgive me, UAE, Saudi Arabia, what are they doing? They're looking for places, coming all the way to Africa, looking for places where they can grow crops so that they are food secure. Now, food security, you may think, is not a serious issue. The Irish suffered a great famine under the premiership of Cromwell, a PM of the United Kingdom. Now, I will not go into the details of the famine. I will give you one very interesting fact that I need you to remember. In their objective to make sure they destroyed the Irish, they passed many rules, but there's one that stuck with me. One of those rules was that land was not to be inherited whole, it had to be divided. It had to be divided among the children you had. It was a practice to make the Irish poor. Shocker. Yet you know, among the rules that they said to the Irish that they will not build industries in the Irish islands, they would not develop them. The most hard-hitting was the fact that they made sure that land stopped being for agriculture. It became something that was divided and something that was not useful to the people. And that's why the Great Potato Famine, in as much as it was brought up by a disease that was affecting potatoes, whether in storage or in the farm, even worse is that their agriculture was broken down. Now, this might sound familiar. It's exactly the same thing the same Brits did to us in this country. And to this day, what do we keep doing? We keep subdividing our land, thinking that we are accessing resources, but rather it is a surefire way to make us poor, because there's no one poorer who cannot feed himself. That's what happened. If you go across same Brits in India and how they made sure they devalued the value of the Indian currency and made sure that the Indians had the largest starvation ever on the continent, not because they could not produce good food, but because the policies of the British ensured that the Indians could not feed themselves. In fact, there are pictures of an old man who is, he's not old, he's just very skinny. It's this picture here. But you can see he's standing guard, emaciated as he is, standing guard over his children to ensure that his neighbors will not come and snatch one and eat them. Yes, you heard me right. People were eating other people's children. That's how great the hunger was. Now, what is the point I'm making? Point I'm making is you and me and this country needs to sit down and consider our food sovereignty. We need to sit down and ask ourselves that in 2023 going into 2024, are we still the kind of country where people will die of starvation? Now, make no mistake, much of our maize comes from Zambia. Zambia used to be a joke of our country, but now it's exporting maize. We buy from Uganda. But even more embarrassing is, even though we are a country in the tropics, we have sun throughout the year. We are outproduced by countries, including the United States, that for 6 months their ground is frozen, they cannot produce a thing. They outproduce us. We need to change. Now, how do we change? The best way to change, and this is my radical idea, and you can stone me, and if you want to stone me, the comments section is where you can throw a few stones. First and foremost, we must stop this obsession with shambas. Every single Kenyan with a bit of money has a title deed for a piece of land they hope one day will either increase in value or they will build a retirement home with 10 bedrooms, spend the night in one while the others smell like moths, dust, and deterioration. That's the dream. We need to change. We need to get to a point where we begin to consolidate land. The minimum and maximum land use laws, as enshrined in our constitution, need to be put into effect. In fact, since this government is a hustler government, let us for once begin to hustle land from people who are not using it, and then bring it to agricultural use. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of acres on maize, beans, beef production, and all of the products that we need. We are not going to win the war of saying we import from Uganda when we keep doing small-scale farming, and if it's not small-scale farming, it is Nairobi people owning land in the village upon which you build and do nothing. That needs to stop. The second thing that must happen is we must begin to stop waiting on rain to produce our agriculture. It is 2023. We cannot keep looking at the sky, hoping that the sky gods will pee a little bit so that our shambas have water. No. No. If Israel can do it, if Israel can make itself food secure in the middle of a desert, what is our African excuse? It is time. We had a revolution. And I know that Mandamano is all about food and how much it costs. For us to truly address it, we need a revolution. And the revolution is, so many of us need to stop owning shambas so that fewer of us can be farmers, mechanized, properly fertilized, so that this country is not at the danger of dying at the next famine, or, God forbid, when the dollar gets to 200. That's my take. See you guys next week.